Coming up on UGTV, Standing Committee Meetings of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas. We begin with a meeting of the Public Works and Safety Standing Committee. This will be followed by the Administration and Human Services Standing Committee.
Good evening. Let's go ahead and get our committee meeting started, and I will call to order the Public Works and Safety Standing Committee meeting. And we do welcome everyone to our meeting. Anyone wishing to speak on an item that's on our agenda may do so when that item's up for discussion. You would have up to 3 minutes at the podium to state your comments, and we would ask you to speak directly into the microphone for recording purposes. And if we could have the clerk call the roll, please.
Roll call. Groneman. Here. Philbrook.
Here.
Markling.
Here.
Kane. Here. Johnson.
Here.
Bynum.
Here. We have one revision on tonight's agenda. It's submitted for item 1, which authorizes the adoption of the Kansas Homeland Security Regional L Hazard Mitigation Plan. So that will come with item 1. And the first order of business tonight is minutes from October 21 Standing Committee, if there's a motion to.
Move to approve.
We have a motion and a second to approve our minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the minutes are approved. So there's 4 items on the agenda, and the first one is requesting approval of the proposed Region L 2019 Hazard Mitigation Plan, and we have Emergency Management Director Matt May here.
And that's Region L, not a fancy pronunciation. of
Region
regional.
L, not a fancy pronunciation of regional. Thank you, Commissioner Markley. Mr. May, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I want to go through just a quick explanation about what this long-named document is and why it's important, and then entertain questions, and then there'll be a full reading of all 600 pages.
Excellent.
Okay.
I'm ready.
No, yeah.
You can do that after I leave.
Okay, got it. All right, so real quickly, what is this? Hazard mitigation is about trying to identify our threat and risk, eliminate it where we can, reduce it if we can't, and be better prepared for it. The best way to do that is to know what those risks are. So that's what this document's all about. It's something we cycle through every 5 years. It obviously helps us, like I said, identify what those risks are, plan and budget for the ones that we can't eliminate, educate our citizens about them. That's important. That way they can take their own protective actions if need be. And then last but not least is make sure that we meet a federal requirement. If we were to go after any grant funds, there are several grant programs that require this document to be in play and adopted. Last year, or last cycle, 2013, we did the very first regional hazard mitigation plan in the country. FEMA had not done this before. They've always done them by counties. And you can imagine of the 105 counties in this state, probably 95 of those plans look almost identical. The names change, but the content more or less, the threat and risk more or less is the same. However, for us, those of us who are in the larger areas with the more metropolitan areas, it's very different. And so they very wisely lumped us together. So they put Johnson, Wyandotte, and Leavenworth together, and that's what this plan is that you see in front of you, is the second iteration of the regional plan. We had a lot of parties, groups, partners, stakeholders involved in this process, starting first with the defined political jurisdictions. So the cities, the community college, the School for the Deaf and the Blind participated, both elements of KU Med and the University of Kansas Hospital, the school districts, as I said, Camp Nash, even the nonprofits are eligible in some cases, and they certainly have a property that is a significant threat potential, especially when you've got a couple of thousand kids running around out there. So they become very important. Stakeholders had several opportunities to participate. There was a planning team made up of key elements of that. You can refer back to the document if you want to see. Section 2.4 has a list of who they are. They also participated in several planning meetings. Those specific dates and times are located in there as well. There were other groups, like I said, state and federal partners who participated. We even had some of our sister jurisdictions in Johnson County and Leavenworth attending each other's meetings to get some good cross information going on. The public was invited on several occasions. This is not something that sets a whole lot of people's hair on fire, to be quite honest. So there wasn't a huge amount of response, but there was some. We offered them multiple methods to do that. One was an online survey, and in the document you'll see not only the content of the survey, but everything that was received back out of that. I think Wyandotte-wide, we had 7 people participate in the survey. So unfortunately, it's not a big data set. Assurances, we had to assure the feds and everybody else involved that we would do a few things. Without getting too deeply into this, it's a lot about rules. We're doing 44 CFR. There's a subset within that is 2 CFR, which has to do with our purchasing procedures and things like that. Because of another grant program I help administer, we were able to get a lot of those little issues cleaned up here. So we're all current on any of these. There needs to be anything else that might change. This is the other piece that's in this big long list, is FEMA's notorious for making changes. The president will send out a new presidential directive. We haven't seen one of those in a long time, fortunately, but they happen. And this is basically just says that if those come down the pike, we're going to accommodate them. The adoption process is what we're doing right now. Says that there has to be a document to that effect. And this is just the starting off point. With adoption here, we're going to move on then to each of those jurisdictional groups that you saw in that previous list, the school districts. Even Camp Nash has a governing body that will need to adopt this. Those documents will be part and parcel to this document. Eventually, we'll scan them all, we'll integrate them into the document. So if somebody goes online to look at it, they'll see that those people have all participated. Content, Gosh, we got data from all sorts of great places. A lot of our own local codes and ordinances, comprehensive plans, master plans, economic development plans, our own emergency operations plan. This one's kind of self-feeding. We build a lot of what we do in the EOP based on what comes out of this, but what goes into this is some parts of our EOP. So we are always making changes and adapting to that, and we're going to add that in here. Flood mitigation, land use, wildfire protection plans, again, not as big an issue for us as it is for the guys out west, but it's a big deal if you're Brown County, for example. Content, the state provided a lot. They have their own hazard mitigation plan. They have their own flood mitigation plans. There's even a regional plan called the Regional Coordination Guide, and it's structured the exact same way we are down in our EOC by emergency support function. So for every ESF we have, there's a regional plan to go with it. And so we look at all of those documents and make sure that they're all in sync and what we call deconflicted. The outcome of this is to create what we call hazard profiles. This is probably the most interesting part of what comes out of this document, is what at the end of the day is our biggest concern. And that's this list right here. So we have flood is number one. Now, most people think of tornadoes and other weather events potentially as number one, and this changes every time we do this. So, and it's based on not only the threat and risk, the likelihood of something happening, the severity of the impact, and the duration, and then quite bluntly, whether we can do anything about it. We put at the top things like flood. There's a lot of flood management work that can be done to try and make that better. Not so much for, say, an ice storm. We know those are devastational. They can be long-term. They can be very broad geographically, but there's not much you can do to stop them. The best thing we're doing right now is putting as much power as we can underground. That helps a lot. So, but you can see the list. They're in order from left to right. So you go down, floods kind of our number one, and land, soil erosion, land subsidence. Those are kinds of things that aren't as likely to happen. And so we don't spend as much time in our planning processes. But quite honestly, most of these things, as far as the end citizen is concerned, there's probably about 3 or 4 different actions, and they're almost all the same. Yes, ma'am.
So it's flood, tornado, windstorm that way, and then go over to agriculture.
That's correct. They go from left side to right side.
Not that I'm gonna rate you.
I appreciate that. I'm just trying to make it as easily consumable as I can, because it's buried in here, trust me. And there's actually several pages on each one of those items about what those impacts are. So what are our mitigation strategies? That's something we went to our groups and our partners and said, what are you doing about it? And I'll pick on my friends at the levee districts. They have been working very hard since March, and nothing's let up yet. And their job is basically keep the wet stuff on the right side of the levee. And they need help with that. And there are some projects that they could potentially apply for grant funds for, because this document exists and because we've adopted it, showing that flooding is a concern for us. And so they can point to this document and say, that's a concern. Here's what we do to stop flooding from happening. Here's the things that we need help with to make that happen. And so that's kind of how this process works. And then it's up to them to go and apply for those grants. Mitigation strategies are based on 7 basic core issues, core capabilities. Threat and hazard is primarily what this one's about, but it has some touches in some of these others like risk and disaster resilience. The planning process, obviously that's part of that. Community resilience, by having these public meetings, by making this public today, we're maybe raising some awareness for some folks. And they'll be able to get this online as soon as we get it adopted. I'll put it up there and they can start to leaf through it and see what some of the concerns are. Long-term vulnerability reduction, that's certainly a goal for us all the time. And then last but not least is really one for us internally, is operational coordination. Make sure the left hand knows what the right hand's doing, and that includes our partners geographically. Do we know what Leavenworth's dealing with? Do we know what Johnson County's dealing with? How can we help them? And then our other partners farther out. This is the piece about the HMGP, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. Underneath there are 2 other additional programs, but the HMGP gets its funding from those disaster response reimbursements, one of which we are in the middle of applying for now, 444.9. We have not gotten very far, mostly because FEMA is very backed up on their requests for that information, so we're kind of in a hold pattern. But typically, it's 15%. So if we do $1 billion worth of damage here and we get reimbursed for that, they set another 15% of that portion aside in a mitigation fund. And quite honestly, I was at a conference where I got to talk to Brock Long for a little bit, our former FEMA director, and he says there's actually a fair amount of money in those programs compared to all the rest. It's really pretty well funded. What we need to do is come up with better projects to put that money out and into use, and better processes for getting that process taken care of. Two other programs, there's a pre-disaster mitigation that doesn't require there to be a disaster to have the funds available. And then there's a flood mitigation assistance, which obviously is specifically aimed at keeping flooding from happening, because we know how devastational that is. All this comes down to this document's adoption is one of the very first, what I call front load. These are steps you have to do before you even think about applying for any of this. You got to do these steps up front, and that's what this document's all about.
Darn, I didn't want anybody to hear me. So did this document come into play when we were talking with the federal government about doing the work down on call?
Yeah, I believe so. It certainly should. They have this. They've already approved it. FEMA's already looked at this and approved it.
Right, right.
We just now have to adopt it.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's all, like I said, this is one of the foundation cornerstones of our planning process. This one, the County Emergency Operation Plan, a couple others that we lean on each other for, and then they have access to it, and then we can bring that up. We can reference it. I reference that list that you see all the time, and even in our training down the EOC.
Okay.
Why are we here? Well, it's this list.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kane?
If a dike is breached, who is responsible for that?
It depends on who owns it. For example, I can pick on the one that's just north of our jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Stryker Island. That one actually is a privately owned dike, and so it's up to them to repair it. And unfortunately, the problems then go downstream, and that's one of the huge deals with flooding is things that happen upstream have huge impacts downstream, and there's no direct way to go back to that cause, unfortunately. So we just have to hope that everybody does their right part and does their pieces. I think the last number I heard, it was probably gonna be 5 to 6 years before most of those levees get rebuilt. Yeah, well, the water's got to go down first before they can do any of the work that they need to do. It is, and it'll stay there. And now they're not looking like we're even gonna get a break. The runoff melt will start in February, and it will be right back to where we are, so.
I was just at a meeting before this one with Fairfax Industrial and Union Pacific, and believe me, this was a topic,
Yep,
this
has
potential flooding.
huge impacts for them because they tend to run their rail lines right along the water lines.
Right, right.
That's really all I had, unless you folks have any other questions.
Questions or comments from the committee, please? Just to note what you stated at the beginning, which is simply that we're complying with federal requirements for grant eligibility, and that it's 3 counties that are creating this document together. And I think this is going to go to the other 2 counties if it has not already.
I believe we may, I'm not sure where Leavenworth is. I know Johnson County's adopted theirs.
Okay.
But they had a quicker opportunity to do that than I.
Thank you very much. Anyone from the public here wish to address this item? If so, we'd ask you to come to the podium. See no one coming forward. And so with that, I would accept a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on this item. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Groneman? Aye. Philbrook?
Aye.
Markley?
Aye.
Kane? Aye. Johnson?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. May.
My pleasure, thank you.
The next item is an ordinance relating to our low-pressure sewer system fees. We've got Public Works Director Jeff Fisher here, and I will turn it over to you to tell us about these changes that we're making.
I think let Misty get us started. and I'll
Okay,
jump
great.
in.
Good evening, Commissioners. This is an ordinance that is in line with our discussion we've had maybe 2 months ago about the low-pressure sewer system. So what this ordinance does is it changes the existing ordinance where it removes the fees associated with the low-pressure sewers. So if this ordinance is passed, Essentially, folks that are on a low-pressure sewer system would no longer pay the monthly fee starting in 2021. Since the budget was already set for 2020, it remains in place, and then effective 2021, they no longer pay the fee for low-pressure sewer.
And do I also understand that everyone, and it's approximately 400 homes, everyone is on the insurance plan?
I believe we're a little over 200 homes.
200? Good. 200 homes, everyone's in, and we're not passing fees on to them.
That's correct, going forward.
Commissioner Philbrook.
Would you please explain to the TV audience what we're talking about, what low-pressure sewers are?
Mr. Fisher.
Right, these homes have a grinder system external to the house, and so all of their wastewater goes to this grinder system. It's pumped into the public system.
Okay.
And that's not normal. It's something that was used to address difficult topography out in that area.
So in other words, we're pumping uphill instead of it flowing down. Okay. I just want to make sure that everybody
Eventually
understands what
gets-
this is for. It's
Eventually
like-
gets to a downhill system.
Eventually gets to go downhill. Thank you.
Commissioner Kane.
This isn't going to affect until 2021.
Correct.
Then do we need to take care of the folks that are not covered in the interim, should something happen prior to 2021?
Oh, you're a speaker.
Give us an example of what you might mean.
If something happens now, between now and 2021, are the people covered?
We were discussing that part of it, and so my advice to the department was to start acting as if everybody was on the insurance program and proceed with getting some community outreach, sending out letters to the folks that are in these areas that have low-pressure sewers, to first let them know that they do in fact have one, explain the maintenance program, and use 2020 as a time to wrap up, ramp up the program so that we have proper communication and outreach, and let everybody know that, we're moving forward in this direction.
Did the bill used to say 3236 and it should say 1306?
I'm a bit confused by that one, Commissioner.
The amount of money? How much were they paying prior to?
Well, that's difficult because it's not on the BPU bill, so you can't see what you're paying, which is part of the problem. I think when it first started, it was very low, and my recent look on it was about $32 a month. And that's part of the issues with why we wanted to make these changes, is you can't tell what you're paying on your BPU bill, or if you in fact have a low-pressure sewer. It's just kind of up to the homeowner to understand what they have.
It's tough. It's tough for the UG to administer, it's tough for the BPU to administer, and it's hard for the customer.
And one of these is in my neighborhood, and I think the issue is maybe we need to do a better job when we're telling these folks if they want to build where we don't need something like this. That maybe the
Yes.
ground isn't acceptable to do that, because this causes you guys a great deal of problems.
That's right.
So I would think that we would be money ahead by making sure we got plenty of ground,
Right.
had them build where it's adaptable versus putting a pump in, because it puts out a pretty good stench.
In the future, staff would take the standard approach everywhere it can. And
I like that answer.
But you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, since there's so much property, to put it in a spot like that. And then when you buy that house, most of the time you wouldn't know you got that.
That's right.
You're just buying the house.
So we're working on kind of cleaning up all of those issues. Points very well made. Commissioner Philbrook.
Well, to tag on to the back of that, so that's why I think that we're doing three acre minimums on some of them now, so they can have, septic tank, because they can't, it's so cost prohibitive to run sewer for a few houses that nobody's going to want to pay that extra amount of money. And then if we did, and then we have to have this other mode of moving the stuff on, gets cost prohibitive. So, yeah, I'm really glad you guys are looking into that and paying attention to that and the new developments.
Any other questions or comments from staff or the committee members?
Commissioners, I would just like to remind everyone that may not have seen the presentation earlier, the low-pressure systems were used as a development tool back when they were first trying to develop Piper. Then new information came down, and we have different standards in our code now about the use of low-pressure sewers, so they're definitely not a favored way of doing things. And another piece to it is after the grinder pumps the sewage up, it goes into a pressurized line where homeowners can't really maintain it. And it's pressurized, so you can't even get in there to inspect it or do work without serious city intervention.
Any member of the public have comments on this item? I don't see anyone coming forward. I would entertain a motion on this item.
Move to approve.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Groneman. Philbrook.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Kane. Johnson.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye. And that motion carries. And item 3 is a resolution authorizing the unified government to provide sewer service to Bonner Springs primarily for the crossings development. And so I'll recognize Jeff Fisher, and if you would introduce the lady who has joined you at the table. Thank you.
Thank you. The UG and Bonner Springs have been working pretty closely to help set the stage for this proposed development in Bonner, just off the southwest corner of State and 118th. And we've been working closely with Amber and McCullough and Sean Peterson, and I know Melissa would like to jump in and.
Great.
Yeah, we've got a group of us in here that have been working with the city of Bonner Springs on this exciting project that they're trying to bring to their northeast corner of their city. And what this does is establishes a long-term agreement for accepting their wastewater from the site. If you would like any of the legal terms, I'm sure Misty will be more than happy to fill you in. But we've worked together as a team from the two cities to try to come up with a way that provided affordable service to them, but also protected the unified government's ratepayers as well.
Are there questions? Would you like to add anything, since you took the time to come and be with us?
I don't have anything to add. I just want to thank the staff and all of you. I'm sorry, Amber McCullough. I'm with the City of Bonner Springs Assistant City Manager.
Welcome to our meeting.
Thank you. I just want to thank you all and staff for working with us so closely and collaborating with us to get this agreement done and get this project off on the ground. It should be very exciting for the entire county.
Questions, comments? This is also a motion to accept this agreement, so.
Move to approve. Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second on this item. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Groneman. Philbrook.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Kane. Johnson.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye. And that motion carries. That was the last item, I believe, on our agenda. And we had a public agenda item. We had a request for appearance of Tashir Mank, requesting community resource officers. Is Ms. Mank here? Okay, so I do not see her. So that would conclude our Public Works and Safety Standing Committee meeting. I want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and thanks for being on our committee. And we do not have Administration and Human Services Committee tonight, which would normally start at this time. So we are adjourned.